So in theory, if I were to put everything back on that differential that came out of that housing and we put it in, our gear clearance, run out, everything should be the same.
You know, Sam, next time you need a level, let me know and I'll get you a precision level.
Welcome to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoatings. Coming up on this week's episode of Sam's Garage, Sam and Kevin install a new transmission in the Jeep Rock Crawler. Then Sam and Doug upgrade the rear end in the Alpha 1 GTO. Dave from Brothers Truck Parts stops by to showcase their direct fit analog digital instrument clusters. Then Sam shows us the proper way to install a water pump in a 68 Camaro. The next phase of the Jeep Rock Crawler build is underway. Sam and Kevin get to work on installing the new transmission from Gearstar. This custom-made, heavy-duty transmission will ensure the Jeep can climb any obstacle in its way.
Always good to have you back on set, Kevin. The Jeep looks awesome. I see you guys got a lot of work done on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We've done a lot of fab work and a lot of the boring stuff that we needed to do, but we still got a bunch more to put in here, transmission, transfer case, and a lot of low-car goodies to show you.
It's going to be good to have the final transmission and transfer case bolted in place one final time. Let's
That's
get
right.
started. Wow, Kevin, what's in the crate?
So I called up Gearstar because we had such success with our transmission in the Buick, and I said, I need one for this thing. He got scared, asked a bunch of questions. He said, we're gonna have to build something really heavy duty, just really knock it out. So I'm excited to see it because the specs are incredible. It's gonna hold up any kind of horsepower, anything we can throw at it.
So did you get a warranty with it too?
I don't know if he's gonna hold that.
I didn't think so.
All of his transmissions run on a dyno for an extended period of time. So they test them out, make sure they shift right and go through all the gears. And he actually talked to advanced adapters for us. They communicated to make sure that they were building everything to the specs that were needed for the transfer case. And it should just bolt up for us. We've experienced some leakage because this is a four-wheel drive transmission and there's no output shaft housing, so that we can't put a normal plug, which would normally keep the fluid from coming out while we're doing installs and such. So stuffing some rags in there to save us some effort in case we end up tilting this as we put it up inside the Jeep.
Now normally you would be using a adapter that goes on the transmission, on the jack itself, so that it turns this floor jack into a transmission jack for the floor. But because of the times, we can't get that part right now. So we're gonna do it like this. Be very careful, don't recommend this at home. Now we're ready to install our transmission. Don't forget when you're putting your torque converter in to really pay attention when you're putting it in the transmission. You'll hear up to 3 clicks. You want to make sure that last click's a good solid thud, and you'll know that it's bottomed out into the bell housing.
So one of the steps that we skip, just in case anybody's wondering, is there's a reluctor ring on the end of the transfer case for a speed sensor. We didn't put that in here because we're really still mocking things up with final parts. You know, we took out the mock-up transmission, but we still have a little bit of floor work to do here, obviously. Right. We're not going to Flintstone this thing down the road, so.
And that's to get the air gap right with the reluctor wheel and the position of the speed sensor.
That's right.
But in your case, you don't have to worry about it because you're going to be using a Hawley system on this, and it's got a speed sensor output that's going to read it right off the transmission sensor.
That's right.
Okay, and we are still in the mock-up phase, so our torque converter is in the transmission, but it's not bolted up to the flex plate. And the reason being is we've done so many projects that things go wrong. That's just the way it is. So what I like to do is get the engine running, put a check on that. Then I'll connect the torque converter, put fluid through the transmission, put a check on that. Everything's cool, then we can put coolant in it and go on from there.
That's right.
Well, Kevin, that fits really nice. There is a little bit of a length difference between the mock-up transmission and this one due to the custom bell housing.
Yeah, we've got this reed bell housing. It's a little thicker, and that's why we got to keep putting parts in, mocking things up, make sure that everything fits with the final parts before we paint anything.
Very good idea. Now that we got the transmission installed, we're ready to put the transfer case in for one final time.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. Continuing the work on the Alpha 1 GTO, Sam and Doug start on the rear differential. After the engine upgrade, the differential needs to be beefed up to handle the additional power. When they're finished, the GTO will no longer be one wheel peel because this rear end is getting equipped with a limited slip differential.
Well, we're back for the second half of the season with our GTO project, and it's been painted completely Ferrari red by Buddy at State Collision Center. What do you think about the work?
This is absolutely fantastic. The depth of the paint, it absolutely pops, Sam. He just did a fantastic job.
Good, I'm glad you're happy with it. What we're going to do this go around is the rear end. The differential needs to be completely changed out. There's one that's bigger, and we're going to change out the LSD inside that factory 200 to make it handle the race course better.
Absolutely, yeah. What we really want to do is to make sure it's going to take all that power, because we're putting a lot more power, a lot more torque into that rear end. We've got to beef everything up or we're going to just blow that pumpkin apart.
Absolutely, and the good thing is that when we go back to reinstall the new differential, we're going to go back with all billet aluminum bracketry and bracing. So it's going to make it a lot stiffer in the rear end.
And that's real important, especially as we start to lay this thing through the turns. We've got to make sure we have the rigidity. Otherwise, if that suspension starts to move around, it's really tough to dial a car in.
Absolutely. First we're going to do is remove everything on the rear end and take the differential out. Then we're going to reassemble the new differential and put everything back in.
Be smarter as you do it. Okay, what Sam did there is he made sure the lift is on its locks. You've got the hydraulic cylinders that raise it up, but if you drop it down, it'll go ahead an area where it's mechanically locked out, so nothing can go ahead and start to drop down on you. It's a real important item to make sure you do. We can try to go ahead and hold it, but if anything were to go wrong, it's a long way down, we can smash our feet, it's easy. We've got a transmission jack, we go ahead and pump it into position. We'll use a chain to go ahead and lock it in, loosen the bolts, it drops down real easy. You always want to think on doing something like, don't muscle it, use your brain as you go through it.
Okay, now that we got the differential exposed, we're going to remove the two end caps that are holding the differential into the housing, and there is a left and a right, so it's very important that you guys orient this correctly. When you remove them, put the right on the right side of your bench, put the left on the left side of your bench so that you know where they go back, because if you mess that up, you're going to need a new differential.
These bearings are really, really impossible to get, so we're going to be reusing them. Make sure you take a look at the race itself, that it hasn't been sitting for a long time. Because if it's been sitting for a long time, what you can do is you can get what they call spalding, where it goes ahead and it starts to leave marks, and it can create a problem inside of the needle bearings.
So the aftermarket differential has multiple holes in it. One set being smaller, it's going to be a 10 millimeter size. The other one is going to be a 12 millimeter size hole. That's just in case you guys went with an aftermarket ring gear. You can use the bigger holes. In our case, we're going to be using the OEM ring gear. It's very important to use the right hole because, as you can see here, we have play. Even though you're torqued down and tight, that ring gear can move within that space. So you want to put it in the hole where there's zero movement. Now that I got the ring gear in place on my differential, it is time for me to repress on the bearings on both sides of the housing so that we can go ahead and reinstall it inside the pumpkin. While I do that, I'm going to have Doug finish cleaning off the face of the pumpkin and the differential cover so that we can glue everything back together. I'm using as a plastic abrasive tool on my die grinder. It's going to give before material gets removed on the cover itself. So that's what we're doing, is removing it with something like this, non-abrasive, so you do not remove material, so therefore your gasket material will actually seal. The differential is ready to go back together again. I did put RTV glue on the cover. It's going to sit for 20 minutes before we put it onto the pumpkin.
Sam, another part of the build complete.
Absolutely, and we didn't have to weld up that differential. There was nothing better than doing an LSD upgrade on your car. It's really going to make your corner a lot better.
That was fantastic. Everything went together just wonderful.
Sam and Dave walk us through the installation of a new digital gauge cluster from Brothers Truck Parts. The cluster is an exact fit to the original with modern gauges. This particular truck has a newer, fuel-injected engine installed, which means that all the electric gauges will be driven directly from the computer via the OBD2 port.
All right, today Dave and I are going to be installing, in my opinion, the most important item on the truck, and that's going to be the digital instrument cluster. We went with Brothers Truck Parts, very accurate DLC OBD2 connector module in this particular unit. That means that we're able to hook up to the factory GM computer and get all of our points that we need to make all these gauges work easily, seamlessly, and accurately. It's going to talk to this box. Now, let's say you don't have a GM computer and you have a Holley in there. This item still comes with all the sensors you need and all the harnesses you need to install all your gauges. Now, the only thing that we have to install through this module is going to be still the fuel sending unit wire, the blinkers, the high beam, and the brake switch. That's going to go through here along with the power and ground.
One little thing though, when you old gauges, they used a mechanical sensor, and so oil actually pumped all the way into that. Make sure that when we replace that's plugged off at the engine, or you're going to have a real big mess.
That's a good tip. Let's go ahead and install the new one.
Right on.
Okay, now I'm going to pop the hood, hook up my power probe, find my wires, power, ground, signal, high beam, mark them, install them. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is look and see if somebody really did put a oil pressure gauge, and he did. Very important, we do not fire up this truck without removing the aftermarket mechanical gauge. Okay, the electric one is still in there. Okay, so I'm gonna hook up my power probe now. All right, so what I've done is I've removed the old cluster and I'm going to the pigtail that plugged into the back of the instrument cluster, and I'm gonna look for power under switch. So right here I got power under switch, and I wanna confirm it by flipping the key. Okay, that's going to be my power for the new instrument cluster. Then I'm going to find my blinkers by doing the same thing, activating my blinker with the key on, and I should be getting a power signal or a ground signal that's going to activate the light bulb that's in the old instrument cluster. Then I can take those wires and put it to the new brain of the new instrument cluster so that the signal gets over to the instrument cluster and you can see everything work.
Well, I turned on the key and it's lighting up, it shows volts, but it didn't do any dancing. Is it supposed to dance?
Usually it does, but the biggest thing that we didn't install, that we have to install,
Yeah?
is the button. Luckily, we were able to get our hands behind the cluster and plug in those buttons Dave was talking about. Now, what you use the buttons for is going to be for programming your display unit when you install your digital dash. As in the sensors, for instance, the fuel level sensor is going to be told that it's a 0 to 90 ohm GM sensor. The tach signal, you're going to have to tell it how many cylinders you have. It's going to ask you what you want your lights to look like when you turn on your lights, what color. The button to the right is going to basically change what information you see on the display units. This cluster is equipped with 0 to 60 and quarter mile times. So with this button, you can change the display and you can activate these times to see what you're doing. All right, Dave and I have the instrument cluster installed in Tommy's C10. He's gonna absolutely love it. Being that it's digital, it's gonna be very accurate, but that bezel really complements the steering wheel and the steering column we installed.
Right, it looks like a brand new truck. The instrument cluster even has temperature, the clock. I mean, it has more functions than your microwave.
Yeah, basically it gets all that information off the computer that runs the car. So the transmission's information, the ambient air temperature for the engine's all gonna be on that display that the instrument cluster from Brothers Trucks.
Beautiful, baby.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Let's go for a drive.
Let's do it.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. The 68 Camaro is back in the shop, and Sam demonstrates how to install a new water pump from Tough Stuff. Step by step, Sam provides some tricks of the trade to ensure a proper installation. Be sure to get your pen and paper ready and take notes.
That's gonna look good. All right, I got the 67 Camaro back in the shop. I'm gonna change out the accessories with Tough Stuff accessories for two reasons. One, I want it to look better under the hood, and two, all the accessories on this car car are almost as old as the car, so it's time for new items. Now I've already started with the high torque mini starter that's chrome plated. I'm going to continue that theme underneath the hood by replacing the water pump, the power steering pump, and the alternator. Now the water pump that I've chosen is a long nose standard water pump. It's got all the fittings I need to be able to put all my accessories back in their original places using the original belts. This water pump from Tough Stuff does flow 30% more water, so it's going to give me a lot better cooling. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to install the gaskets onto the water pump, but this is a chrome water pump. And what I like to do is remove the chrome from the face of the water pump that mates to the gasket. That way it'll be nice and reliable. Then what I'll do is add a little weather strip adhesive just to keep the gaskets in place. Now in this case, I could very easily just do this and keep my bolts in there and finagle it on, but the glue keeps it in place and it doesn't affect the sealing. Because this surface is so slick, there are times where the water will actually leak past the gasket. And so what I like to do is rough it up, and that way everything seats in place, making for a reliable installation. I'm going to go in with new hardware. Now, because I have a Chevy, the bolt holes don't go through into the cooling system, so there's no reason to put anything on there. But if you were working on a Ford, some of those bolts going through the water pump and timing cover actually make it into the water galley in the block. So it's important that you put some anti-seize or some sort of plumber's dope onto the threads before you put them into the motor. Now I'm going to replace this hose. I didn't like the one that I took off, and this is a good time. Anytime you're doing an upgrade on your vehicle, always pay attention to the components you're removing, because if you can change something, if something feels soft like a hose, this is a good time to replace it while everything is empty. Now, I like to, when I put on hoses, because sometimes you may have to take it right back off, I put a little bit of Sil Glide or grease in the openings of the hose, or you can put it on the component itself, and it just makes it very easy to slide on, and it prevents it from sticking in the future. If you have to take it off, it'll just come right off. You also want to make sure that when you're tightening your hose clamps, that the hose clamp itself is past the bulge of the nipple, because you don't want this hose clamp to slide off the nipple and your hose pop off and you lose your coolant and get stuck on the side of the road. All right, I got my Tough Stuff water pump installed. Now this is a short snout water pump, so I will have to get a different pulley, and the alternator bracket that used to bolt up to the face of the original water pump is now gone. So I have to contact Tough Stuff and get an alternator bracket as well. But don't let little things like that discourage you. This is a well worth upgrade. Now that I've got everything disassembled, I'm going to continue with the installation of my power steering pump, and then I can move on from there.